do that while I'm thinking about it.
Hey, someone needs to let in our speaker.
I didn't.
He must have just joined.
Yeah.
Where is he?
No, I don't see him. I thought you said that because you saw him.
He had messaged me. I'm like, all right, let me
All right. I thought we had folks in the waiting room. Are they gone?
no, they're
No, we
there.
still have 5.
Why can't I?
I'll message him. So, what name are you logged in on?
Weird. Why can't I see?
Oh, because I think the role of the host now changed to Peter.
Oh,
Makes
It's
sense.
still, yeah,
Sorry.
put you back at guest for some reason.
All right. No problem.
oh, he's a guest now? Ha!
I'm a guest. Yes.
Look at that.
Well, then I will end my slideshow and stop sharing my screen.
No, actually, don't. Actually.
Oh.
Because I don't have slides ready, so I'd like you to kick them off.
Okay. All right. Well, then let me get this back up and running. Am I sharing the right screen? The correct screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Hey,
Looks
how do I
like-
sound now, by the way? Do I sound quiet, loud?
A little quieter than before, but still fine.
All right. Let me tell him who I see in the waiting room. Oh boy, oh boy.
There's Chris.
His name's Lee Billings, so that's not
Yeah.
it.
Unless he's using a nom de plume. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, good thing I got in here in time.
5 billion years of solitude.
You must have the wrong link.
Are you chowing down on pizza?
Gum. Sorry.
Oh no, I remember you were
My
about
son gave me a bunch of gum. Oh, he's trying to do the meeting ID. What's our meeting ID? Maybe we have the wrong meeting ID posted on our website.
That would be weird. Meeting info. Meeting ID is 926 9544
926 95.
44
Okay.
8427. And I can give you the
Where
password.
he got his meeting ID from. That's a good question, isn't it?
Yep.
Well, let everybody in, okay?
All right. I'll put the Zoom link in the in Discord.
It's mostly cloudy. Hi, welcome everyone. We'll get started in a couple minutes. Dr. Parks, when our speaker gets here, I'll let you kick things off, okay?
Okay.
And then I'll do the Q&A.
Got it.
Hey, Dr. Parks, can you read that meeting ID to me again? 926-9544-8427.
Let's see here. 926-9544-8427.
And do we have a passcode on this meeting?
We do.
What is it?
704811.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Our speaker should be joining momentarily.
Sweet. Oh, there he is.
Hey
All
there.
right.
Sorry it took so long. How we doing?
Doing well.
Great. Welcome, Lee. Glad we
Yeah,
sorted out the link.
very, very good to be here. I need to get one of these fancy astro backgrounds instead of my dingy dark attic. But I hope you'll forgive me.
Cool. All right. Well, this is Dr. I just want to introduce you to Dr. Parks. He's going to be doing
Howdy.
introductions.
Great. Awesome. I decided to have a little fun. So I'm having some June Shine Optical Citrus Hard Kombucha. We'll see how this goes.
All right.
Yeah.
I am tempting to make you, well, you're, Lee, are you going to be sharing slides, or this is just simply going to be a talk show sort of format?
I think it's just going to be a talk show, which is okay. We can all travel to the places we're going to go in our mind's eye. It'll be fine, I'm sure.
Yeah, I
Okay.
put together a couple of slides actually to help guide the conversation.
Oh, great.
All right.
Excellent, Peter.
Yep.
I was just worried that trying to make you a co-host, which I can't seem to figure out how to do at the moment.
Well, as long as Pete has his slides ready, I think we'll be good.
Yeah.
I'm just happy to be here. Oh, there you go. I am now the co-host. I feel like I am the co-host now.
You have the power. All right. There's the time. So do we want to get started?
Let's do it. I'm ready.
All right.
Let's go. I just
Okay.
popped my second optical citrus.
Welcome everyone to Evening Under the Stars here at George Mason University. Tonight we have with us Lee Billings. He and our director of the planetarium, Peter Plavchan, will be talking about something that is of seminal importance to the astronomical community. But before we get into that, I just want to give a brief overview of the observatory and our facilities here, assuming this technology will cooperate. Tonight, unfortunately, will be a virtual, well, it is virtual, but it will be a closed dome tour because the weather here in Fairfax is not being overly cooperative. But you can see from this slide that our observatory is on campus, and it is with Research Hall on top of that silver tower. And there is a control room off to the side where, when in the before times, we would actually assemble on the roof and control the telescope from inside. Here are some of the images that we have captured historically. Students have captured historically with using our facility. We are currently building a much larger and much, in my opinion, better database of images through the student organization of Photo. A few of those students have taken a great interest in astrophotography and are using our telescope to study the heavens in that way. Evening Under the Stars, and this is, I forgot to update this slide, alternating Thursdays evenings at 7 p.m. and the next one will be 2 weeks from now. Typically what we have is a 30 to 45 minute public talk. In this case, it's going to be a back and forth between Lee and Peter. But afterward, we're going to also have a 30 to 45 minute guided tour. Again, unfortunately, because of weather, that guided tour is going to be what we refer to as closed dome. We're going to show you images and images that we have taken recently with the telescope, and possibly talk about some of the exciting science that we've done here at George Mason, which goes along with what Lee and Peter will be talking about. If you'd like to know more about the observatory, what we do, our outreach, our the students who help make this possible. Please subscribe or consider subscribing to the Moon, the Mason Observatory Outreach newsletter. We put this out monthly, mostly on time, and it highlights a number of things that we are doing here at the observatory, and as I said, the students who make this possible. If you are really blown out of the water by what we're talking about tonight, please feel free to become a patron of the observatory. Patrons allow us to do more than allow us to move beyond just simply our sort of university-centric focus. With the donations of patrons allows us to increase our outreach to underrepresented groups and to regions around the Fairfax area that have not had the same resources available to them. So if you are interested in helping us not only fulfill our teaching and research goals, but also our outreach goals, please do consider becoming a patron. And you can become a patron at various different levels, from star all the way up to Big Bang. And here are a list of our patrons that we currently have. So any contribution is extremely welcome. And even just being here, we are so grateful to have you all here. This helps us tremendously. The personnel for the observatory, my name is Dr. Rob Parks. I am the Deputy Director of the observatory. Dr. Peter Plavchan, whom you'll be hearing from very soon, is the Director of the planetarium. We also have on deck our two observatory graduate TAs, Kevin Collins and M. Thanyapong. And we also, I don't know if I saw him, but Jonathan is the president of the Friends of the Observatory organization. They're actually having their next meeting tomorrow at 6, starting at 6. Halloween costumes are encouraged if you go to that. So if you want information, if you're interested, if you're a student and looking for a social activity that involves astronomy, please feel free to Google photo or Friends of the Observatory, and I'm sure you will find where you need to go with that. Lastly, like I said, we have, but not leastly, we have Lee Billings. Lee Billings is a science journalist and has written for a number of prestigious publications, from Nature to Popular Mechanics to Scientific American. He's also written, he's also an author of the book 5 Billion Years of Solitude, which chronicles the scientific quest to discover Earth-like planets elsewhere in the universe, which is really convenient because Peter is also along that quest to discover Earth-like planets elsewhere in the universe. So the two of them definitely have something to talk about. But what they are specifically going to be talking about is something called the Decadal Survey. So every 10 years or so, the astronomical community gets together and decides, what are our priorities? What are we going to spend the money on? What are we going to emphasize? What sorts of research are we going to emphasize in the coming decade? In the previous decade, that was exoplanets and cosmology. So I believe we're going to have some conjecture as to what those priorities are to look like in the 2020s. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Lee and Peter, and I am very curious to hear what you all have to say.
Thank you so much. I'm actually really curious too, because no one knows really, I guess, other than the Decadal Committee members and I guess some reviewers and staff at the National Academies, what is going to be coming from the Decadal exactly. But we will know, all of us will know very soon, actually in just less than a week. So in 1 week from today, the Decadal report, it's called Astro 2020, will be released. Everyone will be able to read it, and we will all find out what the consensus of the committee was and what their vision is for the coming decades of astronomy. So so chances are that stuff I say here is going to be outdated, woefully outdated and looking ignorant in a week. But in the meantime, we'll just go with it.
I think some wild speculation is in order tonight.
Of course.
Thank you, Lee, for joining us. We are recording this meeting, and we'll post the recording on YouTube after November 4th. See how well our talk tonight holds up. But yeah, as Dr. Bark said, I'm the director of the observatory, and I do study exoplanets. Lee, do you want to kick things off? Do you want to tell us a little bit about your background and kind of how you got into science journalism? And I'd love to hear more about that. Actually,
Sure, of course. I'll try to keep it brief. Essentially, I'm kind of a PhD. I didn't really get all the way to even like a candidate stage, anything like that. I didn't even get to grad school. But I early on, when I was in my my freshman and sophomore years of college doing prereqs, I was like, I'm definitely gonna be an astronomer, or an astrophysicist, or maybe a neuroscientist. And either I'm gonna help find alien life, or maybe I will help solve the mystery of consciousness, right? These big, and it turns out I wasn't really well suited for either of those things. I am much more of a natural storyteller than I am, a number cruncher, or someone who's going to be able to set up experiments in a lab, or perform observations at a telescope, or develop models for theoretical calculations and stuff. So very quickly I shifted course after I realized, had this epiphany about my own limitations. And yeah, I basically, what does people say, like those who can't do teach, but I think that which is, it's just not really true, but I think those who can't do or teach end up writing about maybe sometimes those who do and who do teach. So that's kind of what happened. I'm kind of a can't follower, as it were, of all the folks who are at the forefront of all these fields, astronomy and astrophysics and cosmology and stuff. And that's by virtue of being a science journalist. I switched into a journalism major early on in undergrad. Long story short, from there, I basically moved to New York City and got some internships, started producing articles and clips. And next thing you know, I ended up with a book and a staff job at Scientific American. So, I could go into more details, but yeah, I've always been interested in this topic.
Was the 5 Billion Years of Solitude your first book?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's my first and only book, and I keep thinking about, like, it's time. I really want to write a sequel.
Yeah.
I wanted to start writing a sequel a couple of years back, but things got delayed. Things slowed down. Webb has taken longer to launch than anticipated. Even something like the Decadal is quite late. So I've been kind of waiting for various pieces to fall into place, because otherwise, what am I writing about? The first book was driven by advances in the field. I was trying to really talk about the stuff that was at the cutting edge, even though, I in some ways I didn't do that. Like, funny enough, I really don't mention the Kepler mission a lot in the book. I do mention it some, but I don't talk a ton about it.
Speaking of which, what is the book about? I was more than a 2-second summary. And maybe we could post a link to it in the chat.
So the book is essentially, again, I mentioned this camp follower idea, where I idolize people like you and people like Rob. You guys are my heroes, and I mean that, because astronomy and astrophysics and cosmology, these areas of space science, they're I don't want to say they're totally removed from our everyday life, but the concrete financial or economic value that they have is not the same as something like, I'm going to learn how to directly build a better semiconductor computer chip, or I'm gonna develop a better way to make fertilizer or something, right? Instead, there is kind of an appeal to our innate curiosity as human beings, as sentient creatures in the universe. I think that really is indulged and embraced by these fields, and I find that really attractive. And so there's a nobility to it. There's a kind of an unsullied purity that it has, and I shouldn't wax too much about that, because we all know that people are fallible, the process is fallible, the community, there's all kinds of problems. But in theory, it's very removed from our mundane concerns, and that really spoke to me. It always has. And so the book is about certain people and who have kind of devoted their lives to this quest that they may never see the end of, that they may never follow through with. They may never see the light of other living worlds, gracing their computer screens or in their eyepieces for their telescopes. And yet they get up every morning, they put their pants on one leg at a time, and they still go out and do it and try their best to make that happen. And
funny saying with putting pants on one leg at a time. I did figure out that if you sit on the edge of the bed, sometimes you can get both feet into the pants at once.
I had this same epiphany actually just last week with my toddler. I was like, okay, now you're going to sit down and we'll do both legs at the same time. So the book is about, and the book, what it's really about, the title 5 Billion Years of Solitude is a reference to maybe the longevity of life on Earth. You know, we've been around for about 4.5 billion years since the planet formed, it seems. If you look at kind of the more pessimistic estimates from planetary science, it looks like we may only have about 500 million years left of complex multicellular life. Now, again, there's a lot of wiggle room. There's a big error bars. But I just, you know, when I was talking about that, and that number derives from the work of Jim Casting, who's an eminent atmospheric scientist and planetary scientist at Penn State, who kind of derived a lot of the original versions of the so-called habitable zone for terrestrial planets, where you can have liquid water and this life around stars. And so I saw that round number, 5 billion, and decided to make a good title. But the notion is essentially, the solitude part comes in where when I started writing the book, NASA and the European Space Agency and other very prominent institutions were talking about building space telescopes called things like Terrestrial Planet Finder, or the European Space Agency was talking about something called Darwin. There are various flavors and instantiations, and you know, it was a pretty optimistic and heady time in the early 2000s when I started thinking about this. And then kind of what happened is that a lot of momentum got lost for various reasons. Those projects never came to fruition, and we got set back a little bit. Now, you could also argue that we weren't ready to do those things, and so it was good to wait. It was good to cancel them. But the point is that people were very optimistic, and then the wind kind of got sucked out of their sails a little bit. And I saw this process happening as I was like researching and talking to people. And so the solitude bit is this notion that we do have the capability to go out there and to survey all the nearest stars and to figure out whether or not there are Earth-like planets there. That is eminently within our grasp, but it may be beyond our reach because we may not have the will to do it. We may not be able to organize ourselves well enough to do it. It may require planning beyond the scales that we seem able to sustain. And
yeah,
so
not everything that scientists are good at necessarily either.
Yeah. And so the nut of it is essentially that I really do want to find out whether or not we're alone, or at least figure out what's around us. I want to get a map. I want to get a map of the nearby planetary systems. I want to know what's out there, and I want to figure out whether or not there are any planets like Earth. And you know, people will sometimes say, oh, well, what if you build all these big telescopes? You spend all this time looking and then you just find nothing out there at all, man. What about that? And I would say that is one of the most powerful null results in the history of science. And what that would tell you, it would essentially tell you that centuries of thinking in the sciences are kind of wrong. It would tell you that the Copernican principle, which holds that, you know, the so-called principle of mediocrity, the notion that we are not in any way special, that we're average and ordinary, and things that are here are just like how they are everywhere else, is not true. It would suggest, now again, and we're talking about scales, you know, so sure, we talk about like intergalactic scales, cosmological scales, sure. Copernicanism rules the day, I'm fine with that. But on this little space that exists between the subatomic realm and then the realm of the galaxies, there's a space where planets and life can come together in a magical interplay. And we may be kind of a very special, if not significant, part of that. And so, you know, what if we looked around at the nearest 100 stars or the nearest 1,000 stars with one of these big ultra space telescopes, and we found nothing like Earth at all? Maybe we'd take a little better care of ourselves and our planet. I don't know. Maybe we would, but it's that kind of stuff that informed the piece, the book.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder too with some of these other planets. I mean, you know, hey, no one really wants to move in a rush to move to Antarctica,
right? So you want to go to Mars, really?
Diverse climate for me. So I have to say the book is wonderful, and I really enjoyed reading it. And you know, in some sense, we're fans of your work from the perspective of even from the perspective of science communication is a necessity today. You know, science has evolved its language over the past 4 centuries out of a need for precise communication to one another of meaning, of experiment, of analysis, of ideas. And in some sense, it resembles the bifurcation of languages and evolution of languages itself. It's a bit of a microcosm of language evolution, to the point where, eventually, after 4 centuries of the modern scientific method, biologists can't talk to astronomers.
Yeah.
And I couldn't understand a biology paper if you gave me a month.
Right.
But as we get even now today, a couple of generations ago, you could find a scientist that would contribute equally to cosmology versus stellar systems. But today, I have a hard time reading a paper of my colleague down the hall in my same department about active galactic nuclei.
And yet, what is a big tent pole? What is a big tent pole that we can raise up that can kind of bring us all together in an interdisciplinary fashion? What is the great question that must be answered, for which all of these disciplines have meaning? Are we alone? Astrobiology. Is there anyone out there? It combines it all. It combines everything. And depending upon how far you want to go, you want to talk about the fate of technological civilizations and what we might look like in 10,000 or 1,000,000 years or 1,000,000,000 years, if such a thing is comprehensible. Well, you're going to need to bring in things like social science and psychology and technological development and economics and all that stuff, right? That there's all that kind of softer stuff on this side. Well, what allows life to exist in the first place? How do planetary systems form? How is it that the universe managed to go from just a soup of primordial plasma to hydrogen, the feedstock of stars, to make the building blocks that are in our DNA in our cells? You have to put all that stuff together if you're going to figure out how life comes to be in this place. And so that's one reason that I'm guessing I'm putting words in your mouth, but that's what appeals to me about this topic, is that the way it unifies things, the way it can break these bifurcations down to a degree, and we can all have a synergistic effect on each other for a greater goal that would be one of the most enduring achievements we could ever have happen. So, yeah.
Yeah, and where I was going with this was science communication has become critical in our society. Absolutely critical. I mean, we see the breakdown of the evolution of scientific language away from the vernacular, common, language, everyday spoken language, that we are unable to communicate what we do effectively. And it's led to a generation of people who, are skeptical and they don't understand what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I would be skeptical too. I mean, skepticism is actually a pretty good trait to have. So I'm glad that you're here to bridge that language barrier, as it were, and help communicate all the amazing science that is going on in our field and in many other fields as well. So I think that brings us to the topic at hand for tonight. And I do have a little bit of a slide to kick us off, the Decadal Survey. So what is it? Dr. Parks gave us a brief introduction. Let's start with, what is it and how did it get started?
Oh, is that for me?
Yeah.
So the first Decadal Survey, I believe, was in 1964, 1963. And, I have to say, I do not know a lot about the deep history of it in terms of exactly how it came to be, the deepest roots that it has.
Oh, there's a Wikipedia page, so
right.
Go off and find.
But the gist is that there have been, I think, 5 of these so far, and we're now on the cusp of the 6th. And they're organized by the National Academies, kind of at the behest of Congress, and the White House, and so it's a very high level process. It's a document that our government at the highest levels uses to try to prioritize what sorts of spending and what sorts of research priorities we're going to pursue in coming decades, and just to kind of put it in a nutshell for you, the top recommendations of each decadal have profoundly shaped what we know about the universe. The Hubble Space Telescope exists for a lot of different reasons. And so I'm not going to say it only exists because of the decadal, but you could certainly make an argument that without the decadal's endorsement back in the 1970s, that the Hubble would not exist and that we wouldn't know the things we know today that it's given us, which is, where to begin. We could spend many nights talking about what Hubble has shown us about the universe. and it, and it's not just Hubble. It's across the entire scope and span of astronomy in the U.S. Right, so it's the entire set of great observatories: Chandra in X-rays, Compton in gamma rays, Spitzer in infrared, plus Hubble, the 4 great observatories. It's also things on the ground like LIGO, the Large Interferometric Gravitational Wave Observatory that has seen black holes, huge black holes coalescing and totally revolutionize our understanding of these profoundly mysterious and important cosmic objects. It's things like the very large the Keck telescope, the 10-meter telescope, twin telescopes that are out in Hawaii, or the future telescopes that might be approaching 30 meters in size that we're trying to build and that Europe is also trying to build. And so all the facilities, all of the various windows that we have on the universe through looking at the sky in the US have come by and large through these reports. And that's remarkable. It's remarkable that that this works so well. So I'm not going to say it's a perfect process. We can talk a lot more about that, but the fact is that it is a pretty smooth pipeline between what the community says it wants in one consensus voice, unified voice, and what actually occurs and what the policymakers try to make happen. And that's a really enviable thing. And when I was writing and reporting a story recently about the Decadal, which maybe we can share in the chat, but it's I was shocked when I was talking to other people about it. And, I talked to some pretty high level folks, for instance, of the European Space Agency. They didn't make it in the piece, but, they were saying, we have our own model and they do have their own model and it's quite good too. But we certainly envy certain parts of what y'all can do with the Decadal over there. It is the envy in many respects of the scientific world, especially of scientific communities here in the US. I think a lot of folks that are in other disciplines that don't have Decadals really wish they did have them, because then they could have a little bit more prestige and cachet and a little more direct connection to the policymakers who ultimately are the ones who are going to be providing the money, the taxpayer money, to fund these sorts of federal projects.
Caught me chewing on some goldfish.
Sorry, I'll take a sip.
So there are roughly today, the number here thrown around is that there's around 3,000 professional astronomers in the United States, or about 1 for every 100,000 people. It just kind of makes you feel a little small at that point. But hey, we live in a society where 1 out of every 100,000 people gets to be a professional astronomer. I guess that's not that bad.
That's pretty cool.
And astronomers initiated this process, as you said, going back to the 60s, where they agreed on a consensus set of scientific priorities for the community as a whole to present a unified voice.
Yeah.
Saying, hey, there's discoveries out there waiting to be made. Here's where we think resources, money, taxpayer dollars should be prioritized to maximize and make the greatest likelihood of achieving these high scientific priorities within our field of astrophysics. And this was wildly successful, as you've said. The 4 great observatories, Hubble, Chandra, Spitzer. Spitzer Space Telescope was in year 20, let's go backwards. Year 2010, they recommended the Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope, then called W first. It was a bit of a rabbit out of a hat recommendation.
Yes.
And that is due to launch in the mid to late 2020s. I think it's 2027 now.
2027 is the earliest you're looking at. Yeah.
Earliest you're looking at. The year 2000, the recommendation was the James Webb Space Telescope, then the Next Generation Space Telescope. And that is due to launch in less than 2 months. Finally. Hopefully, fingers crossed. But it's now arrived in New Guinea, French island.
French Guiana, yeah.
French Guiana. Thank you. Wow.
It's okay. They look really similar. It's true.
French Guiana. Thank you. Apologies for that error. And in the 1990, the recommendation was for the Spitzer Space Telescope, and that launched in 2003. And if you go back to 1980, That was the report that had the Hubble Space Telescope, as well as the Very Large Array on the ground. And it's not just recommendations about space telescopes, as you said, but also ground-based priorities, the profession. And it's not just, here's our top 3, right? It's kind of like the US News World Report of astrophysics. I mean, all you hear about are the top 10 schools, but
there's more.
But there's more.
Yeah.
There's more to it than that.
Yeah.
I'm not in my office right now, so I don't have my collection of the past couple of them handy. But we're really excited as professionals because a report is coming out in less than a week, for which many of the professional community has been working steadily towards since the last one came out, really.
Yeah.
But this time was a little bit different. I will say that NASA and the NSF try to treat these documents almost like the Bible.
Yes.
Right. As long as you can find some words in there that support what you're going to do, you're good to go. But they do take these recommendations very seriously. And the top recommendation on the space and in space and on the ground almost always gets done. So this is very important. And NASA undertook some efforts to kind of get this process started 4 years ago.
That's right.
For this current decadal survey. And they studied a set of 4 possible flagship missions. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? And then we'll dive into kind of, after that, we'll dive into speculation about what's going to happen.
For sure. So these are flagship missions for space. And what flagship means is a multi-billion-dollar endeavor. And so they have these 4 science and technology definition teams. They spun up circa 2016, I think, and each one of these has hundreds of people involved. There's countless person hours behind each one of these, and each one of these is worthy to fly and should fly. Okay, I want to say that up front. So I want to show you something. I wore this just for tonight. This is a special jacket I got. I actually ordered it off of LL Bean. I ferreted my way into finding the special code that the STT team members were using. This is one of the STT concepts. It's called Luvoir. We'll start with this one.
I should ask my son to find his hat. We were at the celebration of the studies right before the pandemic hit in January, when we finished the studies in January of 2020.
And so it's recent, but these things have been working for years. Hundreds of people, a standing army of people from different parts of the field have been working on these for a long time. And each one actually crystallizes a lot of work, decades of work that have gone into it, right? So these are standing on the shoulders of giants here. These are immense undertakings, and in some cases they're so specific they're getting down to like, well, what's the part list? How many different kinds of bolts do you need to put this thing together in space? They're very detailed, very authoritative. So there's 4 of them. I'll start with Luvoir. That stands for Large Ultraviolet Optical Infrared Observatory, I believe, Luvoir. This is kind of what do you even call it? It's like a super web. It's a gigantic telescope. It comes in 2 different flavors. There's like the budget size and the kind of the deluxe edition. I can't quite remember right now the aperture. It's either one.
15 meters. Yeah.
18 and 15 meters, and we're talking
8.
8 and 15. And you might be looking. You might be looking at, like maybe it's $1 billion per meter, some people have said, or upwards of that. And this is something that is supposed to be a general purpose observatory. It's supposed to kind of do it all. One of the reasons why it's so important to have this very large wavelength range from visible to ultraviolet to infrared is that that's kind of a little bit of what Hubble does. It's supposed to kind of, you look at something like Webb is mostly infrared. Or the Roman telescope is mostly infrared. So when Hubble goes, and it will go, we're gonna be blind in certain wave bands out there in space. And Luvoir was one way to kind of fix that. And it's kind of a kitchen sink thing where it's going to be able to do a lot of amazing stuff, from studying the intergalactic medium to directly imaging planets around nearby stars. And that's partially because its light bucket is so honking big. And also, there's a lot of other stuff, a lot of other stuff we talk about with it, but it's definitely by far the most ambitious of the 4. Kind of what you'd call like Luvoir Light, even though it's its own thing, is something called Habex, the Habitable Exoplanet Explorer, or Habitable Exoplanet Observatory, I believe. And this is a smaller telescope. I believe it only has a 4-meter mirror.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was on the science team for this
Oh,
one.
well, I mean, okay, I'll talk a little bit about it, but I'm not going to, I don't want to blow up your spot. So let me tell you, the whole thing that's so cool about Habex is that it's got something called a star shade. And what a star shade is a separate spacecraft that flies very far away, I think thousands, if not tens of thousands of kilometers away from the primary telescope in that 4-meter mirror, and it's like shaped kind of like a sunflower almost, like petals all unfurled. And what that does is it causes it allows a star's light to be blocked out very, very, very deeply, and it casts a very deep shadow on the telescope when it's precisely aligned just so, and then that allows you to see planets, so exoplanets around other stars. So Habex it doesn't just do exoplanets at all, but exoplanets are a very, very, very big part of its mission. It's probably
lean
yes,
science machine.
yes, yes, exactly. And now let's talk about the other two very quickly. There's Lynx, which if it is built and launched would be the most powerful X-ray observatory ever put into space. What that is good for in particular is, well, it's good for a lot of things, but in particular, it's good for studying black holes. Black holes, they don't make light. Well, they don't, but their accretion disks around them do. The matter swirling into their maws, it forms this big disk, accretion disk, where it gets all hot because it's rubbing against it. It's all the pieces in there rubbing against each other. It gets really hot from friction, spinning around so fast, and that emits X-rays. It glows in X-rays very brightly. So if you want to study black holes and figure out what makes them tick, how they merge, how they evolve over cosmic time from the Big Bang, shortly after the Big Bang to now, you probably need something like Lynx. And that's what it would do. It would also study, active galactic nuclei, which of course are powered by black holes, so on and so forth. Then it would do other stuff that's not having to do with black holes as well. But that's kind of, it's raison d'etre, so to speak. I don't know if I may have just mangled the French there. Finally,
it's all right. I mangled
New Guinea. It's okay, fast and loose. It's all right. It's all right. We're all having fun. The last one of the concepts is called Origins, and this is an infrared telescope. It would be colder, much colder than Webb. So it's kind of more in, I believe, the far infrared, I think, and that lets you do all kinds of cool stuff. It's kind of a little grab bag, everything you can do. You can look at how water gets put together in protoplanetary disks around protostars, around little baby stars as they form, and as planetary systems form. You can track the volatiles in water and other things, organic molecules that you want to figure out, how do they get to a planet in the first place? Origins can help tell you that. Origins can also track the evolution of galaxies, the chemical evolution of galaxies across cosmic time. Get a huge snapshot of exactly how stars have churned out elements through subsequent generations and how those elements eventually find themselves on planets and inside people like you and me. These are the four concepts. I can't quite remember offhand the aperture size of Origins. I didn't mention the aperture of Lynx because it's
Origins I forget as well.
Yeah. But these are the four.
So it's interesting that NASA kind of went out to the community, and I think it was around 2016, and said, hey, last time we kind of screwed up. The JWST started off as a $3 billion mission concept and is launching at around 10 billion.
Yeah. And
Congress said, bad NASA, bad NASA. And pretty much put a cap on their funding for about astrophysics anyway.
Yeah.
And so this time around, NASA said, well, we're not going to let that happen again. We want to get a good idea of how much these missions are going to cost.
Right.
And part of my pod, maybe they were hoping one of these missions would outshine the other ones and stand out. But it's pretty interesting that they came together to become some four kind of really compelling instrument concepts. And some astronomers have been referring to these as the next great observatories spanning the electromagnetic spectrum.
That's right. That's right.
To some extent, Luvoir and Habex cover the same wavelength ranges with different apertures. But in general, what came out of these reports were four really compelling concepts that were well thought out. Some of the scientists involved said that they were like preliminary design review ready mission concepts. Yeah. Let's start building it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but you're bringing up a really interesting point here, and maybe this is where you're going with it. And if not, stop me, we can redirect. But there's these four eminently worthy concepts. Each one would open its own unique window on the universe. I mean, I guess you could say Habex and Luvoir kind of overlap some, right? But really, each one of these is worthy and looking at its own thing. So, you know, they should all fly, or maybe we could combine Habex and Luvoir and say Luvex, right? So the point is that they're all worthy, but here's the rub. These are all beautiful toys. We probably can't play with them all at once. It's not clear we can, actually, I shouldn't say it's not clear. It is clear as crystal. We can't build all of these things at the same time with the available budget. We can't do it. Can't do it. And so you have to make priorities. You have to make some hard choices. Are you going to open a new window on the universe and discover how black holes came to be and how they've evolved over cosmic time? Because I mean, that could lead to all kinds of crazy physical revelations. Who knows? Or do you want to, for instance, find another Earth around a nearby star?
Yeah, and these space missions aren't the only game in town either. We've had some amazing discoveries over the past couple of years coming out of the Event Horizon Telescope, basically the modern successor of radio astronomy. And maybe there's some talk of putting some of those in space as well. And also the entirely new field of gravitational wave observational astronomy, the so-called multi-messenger astronomy, where it's not even light we're talking about, but the ripples of space-time itself. Yeah, so it's interesting that NASA studies these concepts with these other concepts that I'm talking about. You know, some of it's being done by Europe in space with the LISA mission, and some of it's being done on the ground as well. Yeah, so they presented these 4 concepts, and you're exactly right that we can't afford all 4 of them. Just to put some numbers in people's heads, you know, $1 billion mission sounds pretty awful. What do you think about it? You know, especially when many of us can't even afford groceries these days. My Costco bill. Don't get me started on my last trip. You know, it's, you know, where does all this money come from? It's fundamentally taxpayer dollars. But when we think about spending, you know, for example, $10 billion on JWST, which is launching later next month, I mean, that was spread over 20 years or so. So that knocks it down a little bit, but you know, we're still talking hundreds of millions of dollars per year. And that still seems like a lot. It actually pales in comparison to the federal budget, which I believe is around 3 trillion a year these days. It's pretty large on that order.
I mean, if you divide
dollars.
I think non-discretionary is like one thing. If you think about discretionary, I think it's like, it's more than $1 trillion.
Yeah, it's over $1 trillion
every year.
Every year. And NASA's budget was, for a while, it was around the $20 billion mark every year, but now I think it's closer to 30. It's kind of 27-ish billion a year. My brain cells are still working.
Right.
And so this is actually a drop in the bucket to be spending a few $100 million on a mission out of a $25 to $30 billion annual NASA budget. And $30 billion of NASA sounds pretty crazy, but actually during this pandemic, the federal spending went up so much that NASA's portion of the federal budget dropped for the first time down to 1/3 of a penny out of every tax dollar being spent. So it's a small fraction of the federal budget. It's actually a small fraction of the NASA's budget, and it pales in comparison, say, to the military. I mean, the military in a given year at $550 to $600 billion a year dwarfs NASA's budget by a factor of 20 to 30. So where's all that money going to? It's mostly salaries, right? It's mostly people, and that does get respent in our economy.
Yeah, we don't just put billions of dollars into a rocket and shoot it into the sun.
Yeah.
It's not what we do. It does.
And true, JWST's mirrors are coated in gold, and that's not because, you know, we're trying to be all fancy. But it's actually, gold is actually very reflective. It's like a perfect mirror at the wavelengths of light, redder than our eyes can see, we'll be operating at. So moving away from the dollars, it is true, though, that these missions are on the order of $10 billion a piece. And, you know, in 2010, the top recommendation, the Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope, they imagined a smaller telescope because of budget concerns. It was supposed to be 1.4 billion. And, since NASA swapped out the telescopes, and now it's a 3.2, 3.4 or something like that, $1 billion mission. And, we're kind of at a crossroads, which is kind of the thrust of your article in Scientific American. And so why don't you tell me a little bit about that crossroads we're at now in terms of vision versus kind of the status quo, and what are we looking at?
Yeah, well, essentially what it is that we've plucked all the low-hanging fruit, right? We've been doing this. This is the 6th decadal. We've been doing so-called, modern space science in the space age for a while, launching things into space. And again, I shouldn't just focus on the space stuff, but building big observatories on the ground in space across various wavelengths. We've gotten better and better at it, more and more capable with seeing deeper and deeper into the universe in different ways, different timescales, studying different things. But again, most of the low-hanging fruit is gone. And I can't wait for people to prove me wrong and be like, well, you totally forgot about this, and this is going to be the next new vibrant growth area, right, that you didn't see coming. Great, I hope that happens. But as far as I can see, low-hanging fruit's gone. And what that means is that if you want to make meaningful advances, and when I say meaningful, I mean, it's not just having an extra figure of significance for the age of the universe necessarily, even though that's a big deal. If you want to make fundamental advancements at the frontiers of knowledge, you have to build bigger and more sophisticated telescopes. A huge part of it is just focusing out on your wavelengths, getting a big light bucket, or it doesn't have to be a light bucket again. If you're doing something like a gravitational wave observatory in space, but all these projects are on the order, as you said, about on the order of like $10 billion, if not more. And we don't have. It doesn't seem like we can really sustain them all simultaneously with current budgets. So you have to make these hard choices. And the other element of the crossroads, where we're choosing which fields flourish and which ones maybe languish or die on the vine, is that we aren't alone. We are no longer, there's this, the Francis Fukuyama end of history idea that after the Cold War and the fall of the Soviet Union, there was only going to be the US dominating the world and we were going to be a hyperpower. Well, that's a bunch of BS. China is spending a lot of money on its space science efforts. Europe, via the European Southern, or we have ESO and ESA. The ESO does the ground-based stuff. ESA does the space-based stuff. Europe is also spending a significant amount and planning very well with its own space science programs and stuff in astrophysics and astronomy and cosmology. And so we are no longer, and I don't want to get too jingoistic here. I don't want to get too nationalistic and say it's all about us versus them. But it is a real concern in the context of having a healthy national community and capability, right? If you don't have the best telescopes, if the best facilities, the brightest minds in the world, they're going to go someplace else probably. You will get a brain drain. You could see essentially, I don't want to say irrecoverable, but very difficult to recover from losses in our human power, our brain power, and in our ability to open up windows on the heavens based upon what happens in these reports. And so a lot's at stake because a lot of facilities are, this is the first decadal to my knowledge in which the past 2 top recommendations for space, the past 2 flagship recommendations are still on the ground when it comes out. That's never happened before. You're in this place, this liminal state, where a lot of Hubble could go any day now. We know that from earlier this year. Remember earlier this year, anybody?
Where it went into safe mode again yesterday.
Yeah, right.
A couple days ago.
Yeah, and of course, going into safe mode is a big deal, but it's not. I have utmost confidence in space telescope science folks that they're going to be able to nurse it back to health. But the point is that
it's a common occurrence, I should say.
Common occurrence, but these are limited lifetime assets. They are not guaranteed into the future. I grew up with Hubble. I was born in 1981. Hubble launched in 1990. So when I was coming up and I was a child, Hubble was just there. All the bounty of discovery that it gave to us. I'm used to that. Most people are used to that. People even younger than me have never known a world without Hubble. And Hubble's not going to be with us. Maybe we'll get 5 years out of it. Maybe. Maybe more than that.
Space is a harsh environment. Yeah,
it is. And so what that means is that, these eyes that we have in the universe are closing. And it's not just Hubble. Arecibo. Who remembers Arecibo? Who remembers it? It's gone. It used to be the world's largest single dish radio telescope. It was
My
amazing for
goodness,
planetary
yeah.
radar. It was amazing for a variety of really important observations. And it's gone. And one of the reasons why it's gone, I don't know if anyone officially will say this. It's gone because, well, it was expensive to maintain, but we kind of neglected it.
We absolutely, I don't want to name names, but the NSF has struggled over the past 20 years, and they will admit to this,
Yes.
to being able to afford the priorities of the Decadal Survey recommendations. I mean, certainly going back to 2010, they made very clear, like, look, I mean, you want us to do this top recommendation, but if we're going to do this top recommendation, the LSST or now the Vera Rubin Observatory, this means that we have to make some hard choices about existing infrastructure. They call it divestment.
Right. And
Right.
so what we're getting at, and that's kind of what I was trying to get to earlier when I was talking about how things are getting more expensive to build because we have to build them bigger because the low-hanging fruit is gone. We're a victim of our own success, not only in this country, but around the world, because it is a global community of astronomers. We do share data. We're all on the same page, ultimately, I think, when it comes to our big mission to unveil the cosmos. But as victims of our own success, we've painted ourselves in this corner where, to make further breakthroughs is so expensive that it is essentially, as far as I can tell, unsustainable as it's going if we're going to try to do everything at once. We have to parcel things out, very carefully prioritize, figure out what's going to happen when, what can wait, what needs to happen now, right? And yeah, while we're doing this and having this exercise, again, we have, I mean, frankly, even though we're all sitting around the same campfire together called the sun on this one little rock, we're all friends, they are competitors. And again, the issues I mentioned earlier of prestige, national prestige, or brain drain or whatever, and capability, these are all interconnected. And that's what the crossroads is. The crossroads is, and what's going to happen next week when we find out what the report says, it's going to be telling us what the next 30, if not 50 years, I think, of astronomy look like in this country, and maybe by proxy throughout the world. I mean, and again, like I hesitate a little bit to put so much importance upon this single document process, but that really does kind of seem to be what it is. And so,
and we've seen the brain drain that you mentioned before in the field very close to astronomy, physics.
That's right.
Right, with CERN being built in Europe, and in the U.S. the superconducting super collider, or the SSC, I forget exactly what it was called, being canceled in the 90s.
Yep.
1990s.
Yep.
And it was essentially the death of particle physics in the United States. And faculty in the U.S. that still do particle physics, there are some, right? Many of them travel to CERN to do their research, but some of them have found other avenues and other fields to pursue. But it was a profound change in the community. So we got this preview about the Decadal Survey that was announced on the National Academy's website last week, for the report coming out next week. Came with some artwork, right? And we've been reading into this artwork and the few sentences that came with it ever since. I mean, Twitter's all a Twitter, as it were. And I myself have partaken in dissecting the words here. The title, Pathways to Discovery. And this is artwork on the National Academy's website, which is almost always, in prior examples in other fields, from the cover of the report. And so what do we see here in this cover, and what can we divine as to what might be going on here?
It looks to me, the stuff on the left is it looks maybe like merging galaxies, or perhaps like some kind of galactic nucleus, or it could be the center of a
so it's a black hole collision.
Oh, black hole collision. Okay, yeah, I guess you see that through the streaks and stuff. Yeah, okay, so black hole collision. And then in the middle,
someone, Grant Tremblay, who is one of the scientists for the Lynx mission,
yes,
has actually reversed engineered. So this was custom art commissioned by the National Academies. It's a composite image of other artwork, often from NASA. But they actually reverse engineered what the source is of all the pieces of artwork. So on the left we have I think it's colliding black holes, but it's definitely black hole. And on the middle it's a little bit harder to tell, but it looks like it's from a dark matter simulation. It's like a cosmic. It looks like a galaxy formation simulation, right? So you see these strings and galaxies and voids. It's like a universe scale, although it's really hard to see in this picture. I promise you that's what it is. And then on the right, we have some exoplanets. In fact, people have named them. The top one is 55 Cancri E, and I forget what that one is. There's more to this art that's been uncovered. I don't know where, but there's a tip of TOI 700D at the bottom of this image. I'm not showing the whole thing. So it's interesting for me that this parallels kind of the major divisions of astrophysics within NASA currently, right? Cosmic origins, the exoplanet program analysis, exoplanet exploration, and then physics of the cosmos. Physics of the cosmos, cosmic origins, and exoplanets. Anyway, that's just speculation on my part, but I thought that was the first thing. And then the title, Pathways to Discovery, at least to me, implies that there are multiple pathways to discovery.
Yeah, I don't know how useful it is to read these tea leaves. It's fun for sure, and so we can indulge. What is this? Let me see. Presents an ambitious program of ground and space-based activities for future investment.
Yeah, that's the standard. Yeah.
Yeah, of course it does. My fear, frankly, is that okay, so let's be real for a minute. NASA has guardrails for the decadal, as in I don't think I don't necessarily know if it's as exact as like, okay, look, you can't present a program of record of recommendation that will exceed X amount of dollars. But I mean, I don't know if it's in that language, but I think that is the effect, right? Because I mean, we can't exactly, what would happen if we had a bunch of maniacs on the main decadal 20-person committee and they all were just like kids in candy stores. They're just gonna be like, we're gonna do it all. Yeah, it's gonna be $1 trillion. Like,
No,
right?
They're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, well, exactly. There's the guardrails. And so with the guardrails, though, which is, I'm not saying guardrails are bad, but the way that you can manage that, right? How do you manage that? How do you manage the guardrails, keeping things within this envelope? And there's a couple of different ways. You can really swing for the fences with some big, huge, ambitious thing that's mostly in one area, or that is mostly one project or a couple of very cherished projects. You could also kind of, what I would say, maybe the right way to put it is that you could balance things so that all your constituents are equally disappointed. And that's actually what I really worry about.
That's what you fear.
That's what I fear, because while that
the compromise decadal,
well, because it could be really good. It could be good, I think, in the short term for the community, and I could be totally wrong. It could be really good for the community in the long term. I mean, sometimes you shoot for the stars and you don't hit the moon. You just end up floating in the inky void and suffocating. So there is a big risk to biting off more than you can chew, and we've seen that with Webb, right? And so there's a fine line to walk, but my concern is that if we go too far in the other direction in trying to please everyone, you end up equally disappointing everybody. And what you really end up with is with a program that is not ambitious. It's ambitious in trying to satisfy all its constituencies. It is not ambitious in terms of trying to actually advance some great question. And again, I'm not saying that there's that one is right and one is wrong. They're different approaches. But the reason why this concerns me is because we have to link this back to, I don't want to call it brass tacks, but you mentioned taxpayer funds. This is publicly funded science. I'm not saying that we need to in all cases, defer to populism and embrace that. Because if we did that, I don't know, are we going to build a space telescope just to find UFOs? Are we going to look at Roswell? What are we going to do? Like, you can't just rely on the bulk, the average aggregate of what every single person in America wants or thinks they want astronomers to do. If that's how you get your marching orders, you're probably going to have some problems because they're not the experts, right? It's important to have people who know what they're talking about to a very fine degree making these choices. But because it is taxpayer funded, it's just a drop in the bucket, we've mentioned, but it's highly visible, and it's very ripe for these really cheap, easy, disingenuous or ignorant attacks, right? And you know what I'm talking about. You're talking about the things we've all heard. If you're in the field or you're interested in it, oh, well, what's the point of there's children starving? Why are you building a space telescope? Well, why do we spend more money on potato chips every year than we do on space telescopes or Halloween costumes or pet food? Right? I mean, you can play that kind of like that opportunity cost argument with any single endeavor of humanity, but for whatever reason, people like to pick on astronomy and space science. And again, it's because it's disconnected from so many things here. It's so pure. And my concern is that if we present a program that is not sufficiently ambitious and exciting to the public, we risk losing public support if we even have much in the first place. We risk eroding our base, so to speak, and you end up with less of a budget and less capability at the end of it than you would have otherwise just by going ambitious. So that's what I'm really worried about, and I'm worried about it. What's going to happen in a week, because again, we're going to know in a week what it's going to be.
Yeah, no, this is wonderful. The thing that kind of gets me when thinking about this report is the greater context of change going on right now in the space industry overall.
Yeah.
There's always been kind of what these mission concepts, Lynx, Origin Space Telescope, Habex, Luvoir, they're very low risk in the sense that they have tried and true technologies behind them. They're bigger, they're better, they are ambitious. They do require, each one of them does have some technology development required, but in terms of feasibility and risk, we try to minimize that risk in doing these mission concepts. And there's always more risky things out there, and these decadals don't predict everything, right? Exoplanets these days, as I like to say, is eating the field of astronomy. If you go to a conference of professional astronomers, that's covering the whole field of astronomy, exoplanets can easily eat up a third of it these days. But I wonder, with the 2010 decadal and the recommendation for the Vera Rubin Observatory, or LSST as it was known then, how the changing landscape of the space industry is already impacting our field. The cheap access to space through CubeSats, the private space industry. There's just a release yesterday about what they call it, the orbital reef, the Blue Origin's concept for a commercial space station. Of course, there's some mention of a space telescope being on that as well. And at the same time, Starlink and the impact it's having on ground-based astronomy.
On Rubin.
Which they started working on the decadal before the first Starlink satellites even launched.
Yeah.
And yet today we're increasingly seeing light pollution effects from them. And it actually, ironically, the telescope that is most impacted by Starlink is the Vera Rubin Observatory, the top recommendation of the Decadal Survey 10 years ago. So I'm personally curious kind of what kind of balance this Decadal Survey is going to strike between kind of the steady as it goes, kind of low risk, it still may be ambitious and big science that needs to be done, versus kind of the risky business and taking advantage of the cheaper access to space, acknowledging that what's affecting professional astronomy on the ground in terms of radio light pollution and visible light pollution. I think there's so much change afoot right now. I find it a very hard thing to consider, a very hard task that these astronomers must have been handled in terms of how do they respond to this in this report.
Absolutely. And I do not envy any of them their task. I feel like it's really been, I mean, it's one of these things where I'm not quite sure how you actually succeed. I don't know what your success condition is because you're having to balance so much. There will be winners and losers, right? So from some perspective, you're going to mess up and you're going to do a terrible job. And in some other respect, in some other perspective, you're going to be the best thing ever. And you did everything right. And you're God's gift to astronomy. And you know,
I mean, as you know, but for the audience, I mean, the astronomers that are on this committee were selected. The top 2 co-chairs, I think, were picked by the National Academies itself, but then they built a consensus group of the top committee, and each one of those picked groups of subcommittees with broad representation, with a lean towards more senior astronomers, more familiar with the process and how it works and the stakes that are involved. But they sacrificed 2 years of their lives. They agreed to do this before the pandemic hit. And they've been writing these reports possibly during the worst time to write them since World War II, before the decadal even existed. Just the amount of sacrifice they all had to make in putting together these reports. It is totally admirable. It's very selfless. They're going to piss a lot of people off too.
Yeah.
It boggles my mind, and I'm thankful for, I thought about volunteering, and boy, am I glad I didn't.
I'm sure that Fiona Harrison and Rob Kennicott would love to hear this, because they would just be like, someone gets it, they know, and the other committee members, do too. So yeah, they have an unenviable task, and that doesn't mean we shouldn't hold their feet to the fire if they messed up. I guess, but not really though. That's the thing. That's what's kind of interesting, is that the community, if most of the people I'm talking to right now are in the community, you're held hostage. You are in thrall to the decadal, because this is I mean, I don't want to say it's as good as it gets, but there's the final quote of my piece, that decadal piece, was it was Joel Perriott, the head of policy for the WES, and I'm going to probably mangle it and misphrase it, but it was essentially, the decadal might be a little bit like democracy, in the words of Churchill, where it's not that great, but it's better than all the other approaches that have been tried. But what I mean by you're in thrall and you're held hostage to it is that if you start throwing rocks at this thing, if it comes out and you're not happy personally about it, or your community isn't happy about it, and you start trying to undermine it, what's going to happen? It's not clear. In some, advocacy is a thing. Lobbyists are a thing. Various groups and institutions, maybe even George Mason, I don't know, have lobbyists. I certainly know that JPL has lobbyists.
We do.
I know,
yeah.
right?
I personally have gone and lobbied for the Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope when it was on the chopping block every year during the Trump administration.
So you can imagine a scenario unfolding where if the decadal is somehow displeasing to so many different constituencies, or to some very loud and very powerful constituencies, that they could try individually or collectively to undermine it, to change its recommendations, to say that's not a good idea, we should do this instead. And if you do that, you're going to send really mixed signals to, again, the appropriators and the policymakers who are writing these checks every year and figuring out what we're going to do and holding the purse strings. And do you want to be off message? Do you want to speak with one voice or not? Here's the thing. Everyone, it makes sense. You don't want to break something, right? Because it can be hard. It's much easier to have that Humpty Dumpty on the wall than to have it fall and try to put all the pieces back together, right? That's entropy. It's how it works. But, it's just between a rock and a hard place for the astronomy community, because it's funny, it's this consensus document that no one knows what it's going to say. It's consensus.
They've been very tight-lipped about it.
Yep.
There's been a few rumors floating about what was holding up the release of it, but and I'm sure Lee, you know more than I do, but I have no idea what this document's going to say.
I mean, I really don't know either. I really don't. And I mean, all you can look at is its statement of task and purpose.
The
and figure out
discretion of the committee members
is amazing.
amazing.
But the point is
they're
that, you
holding
know,
I mean, right now with all the speculation, they're just to not say anything for another week.
But can we admit the possibility, and I think we already have tacitly, but can we admit the possibility that the Decadal could get it wrong? And what does that mean? And if that's a possibility, what do you do with this consensus document that has no consensus around it potentially? And again, I really hope that this is not, that what I'm speaking here in these dark tones in this darkened room is not reflective of reality. And I think there is a path, a middle way that can be walked, and I hope that they've taken it.
Pathways.
Pathways. But again, there's that question. Are you just going to equally disappoint everyone, or are you going to swing for the fences? And let me just put my biases on the table, right? And you should know, because of the book I wrote and how I've waxed so eloquent about. I see that we're running out of time, but we're about the search for life. I'm convinced that as much as it matters, if it matters at all, and maybe it doesn't, that the search for life beyond Earth, is a unifying concept that can bring benefits to essentially every aspect of the field, and not even just astronomy. We talked about how it extends, but I really think that is a big tentpole, and that the benefits that accrue from prioritizing that and making that an organizational principle for research for some period of time in the early 21st century, that it's more than the sum of its parts, and that you essentially just get immense benefits, knock-on benefits from having that. And one of the biggest ones is just the fact that the public would be engaged. They would support it. You want more money? You want more money to build telescopes? Do something that captures the public's imagination. And I can't think of anything that does that more than the search for life. But again, I'm biased. I admit it. I'm biased, and I think all the stuff's really cool. But here's just to kind of put a pin in it. I think a lot, and maybe I'm a pessimist. Actually, I think in a lot of ways I am a pessimist and an alarmist. But I think a lot about things like the effects of climate change. I think about the sorts of systemic instabilities that have been laid bare more and more over the past 2 years by something like the pandemic, which has shown the various weak links that exist in how our society functions at a very basic level. And we're now, we're kind of cascading from one crisis to another, ping-ponging, what was it, because there was a subprime housing collapse and the crisis. There was the Wall Street collapse. There was ruinous wars in the Middle East, pandemics. We can go on and on, and I can get too broad to the point where you dilute any meaning. But my point is that if you're betting on stability and the way things are now to be the way things will be in coming decades in terms of our system, and what our priorities are in terms of spending, how much money we have to spend, right? How much largesse we have to do things like big telescopes on the ground or in space. I think that's a very dangerous and risky bet. So I think there are big changes coming in our lifetimes, and certainly in the lifetimes of our children and grandchildren, that this sort of planning doesn't really account for, even though when you look at the timescales, it's certainly of relevance and overlapping. And so just to put a pin in it, if we're in an environment where resources may become more constrained, and you may have to fight harder for your slice of the federal pie, you damn well better know what you're doing and prioritizing in terms of making it look good and being appealing to the people who are paying for that. And again, that's the taxpayers. And that's my soapbox. That's my biased soapbox. And I'll step down now, and I'm happy to take questions. And I'd love for people to tell me how I'm wrong, because I seriously, I don't get enough of that. I don't. So
I'll tell you how you're wrong. All right. Well, thank you, Lee. It was a wonderful chat. And just so you know what's coming up for many of the students here who are waiting in the audience too, What we're going to do now is we're going to take any questions you might have for Lee. And then we're going to turn it over to our Dr. Parks and our observatory graduate student TAs, Kevin and Em, who are going to give us a virtual observatory tour for our telescope here behind me. We encourage you, Lee, to stick around if you want to have some more discussion, but you're welcome to. It is kind of late, so you're always welcome to hop off if you need to get going. So let's thank Lee Billings for joining us tonight. Give him a round of applause virtually. You can use the reaction button.
Oh, there it is. Look at little emojis.
Yeah.
Thank y'all.
We got the. It's too bad we don't have snaps on the. Right. we can throw some confetti up there.
Yeah, a little bit of beatnik applause, right?
Yes. So I appreciate you coming on. And so if you have questions for our speaker, feel free to post them in the chat. I will just say too, to put a coda on it, I'm biased as well. I've studied the field of exoplanets, and I think it certainly captured and captivated the general public, and just the amazing pace of discovery over the past 20 years is only accelerating in this new subfield of astronomy. I often call exoplanet science precision astronomy. I mean, a lot of it is about doing the same things we've always been doing, just doing them with more precision and accuracy. But it's amazing what we've been able to do with that. I mean, some people may not realize, but to detect a transiting planet the size of the Earth and from a sun-like star, we're talking about a change in brightness of 100 parts per million. Yeah, it's just amazing what we do. I mean, if we want to detect the velocity reflex motion of an Earth-sized planet, and we're talking about turtle speeds, detecting changes in the speed of a star, something 300,000 times the mass of our entire planet, with all its spots and plages and active regions, and we're trying to tell whether it's a turtle crawling towards us or away from us over the course of a year. But we're doing it.
It's crazy.
We're getting there. We now have the instrumentation to do it. And really it's the analysis and the investment. So it does captivate the public's imagination. I think it's an amazing period of discovery. One of the jokes I like to tell is that entire worlds hang in the balance of our analysis. They either exist or cease to exist, depending upon one digit going the other way or another. So in any event, do we have any questions for Lee?
Oh, please, somebody, come on.
Yeah, I'll start. So you've been toying with your next book. Your first book really kind of captured the history of exoplanet discovery in an incredible way, and the field has changed. Some of those people are no longer active members in the field, to say the least. And the field is changing, it's dynamic. And so, what might you be thinking about writing about next time, if you can drop any hints?
Well, I mean, it's so early. I mean, I can certainly talk about some stuff, but it's so early that I don't have a pub date, I don't have a proposal. I'm very driven. I'm driven by personalities, obviously. Like interesting individuals who have interesting stories to tell, because I'm a storyteller, and it's kind of and that's also, I want to note, that's, you talk about biases, that's a bias that I have, right? Because a lot of times the coolest work isn't necessarily going to be done by the coolest people, believe it or not. It's not always going to be some hotshot who's on the cover of a magazine or who's giving a TED talk who's changing the world and changing the subfield. It's going to be someone who's toiling away unknown in a basement, right? Looking at lines of code and sweating it based on whether one of those digits flips or not, whether or not a world is there or not. It's that kind of stuff.
Did you ever see that movie about the Kepler mission? Or it wasn't really about the Kepler mission per se, but that guy and the girl and
what's it called? What's it called? I wrote it up. I wrote it up for Scientific American. I thought it was pretty well done. I mean, there's some laughable errors in it, right?
Of course.
But I thought it really captured kind of a lot of the ethos of just the feeling of what this is about very well.
And a little bit of that boring kind of rote kind of working through things. Yeah. I do have a question. Why isn't the government as interested? Oh, this is a good question. Why isn't the government as interested in space like the billionaires are?
So
Yeah.
I'm gonna be that guy and be like, your question is invalid. I think that actually government is more interested in space than the billionaires are. It's just they're not interested in doing the same things. Governments have been interested in space for a very long time. The joke on Capitol Hill is that NASA is like what, like the 7th or 8th most well-funded American space agency. And that's because all the spending in space is military spending, right? Think about how many military and classified satellite launches there are every year. Think about the infrastructure that exists for that. Think about how so often
well, we don't hear about that, but
we don't hear about it as much, right? But that's that. You think about assets that exist in geosynchronous orbit, 22,000 kilometers above the planet, or is 20,000 miles? I can't remember. And what they're doing up there, things like early warning systems for nuclear launches and very detailed, sophisticated surveillance of the globe across many wavelengths, understanding what weather is like in shipping lanes for global commerce, and we're increasingly getting this situation where there's that famous quote from William Gibson, the science fiction writer, where it's like, what is it? The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. We're seeing that more and more. I think in terms of the public-private divide that exists in terms of space assets, because now you have things like, what is it? Planet that has their Dove satellites that can give you near real-time imagery from around the world. That's pretty good. But of course, it's not Pentagon grade, which is all to say that governments are immensely interested in space. It's just that they don't necessarily care very much about putting meat in tin cans too much, or sending them to Mars too much, or looking for exoplanets, or seeing the first light of the very first luminous objects too much. But they do it enough. They care about it enough to have things like Webb and have things like the International Space Station, right? Have things like Hubble. So I don't know if I really have a good answer to your question. I just think that a lot of there is a lot of interest and a lot of money in space, but not a lot of it really goes directly to the things that folks I think here in this chat room consider to be very very intellectually stimulating. Maybe they'd agree it's important, but it's maybe kind of boring.
Well, I would love to know about some of these classified assets. I mean, over the years, I've heard a few things here or there, but I would love to know what the National Reconnaissance organization is up to these days.
Well, I mean, so Hubble, right? Hubble is a modified keyhole satellite, right? The size,
spilling the secrets, but yeah, it's not a secret anymore.
Yeah, it's not a secret, but right. But I mean, Hubble came directly from spy satellite work, and I remember there. I think this has been published. Someone is, I'm not going to bother noting the article of the person who said it, but you can find it if you want. When WFIRST, which now is the Roman space telescope, the next flagship after Webb, that's supposed to launch in 2027, when that was upgraded from like a 1.2 or 1.3 or 1.5 meter mirror to the 2.4 meter mirror, which is Hubble size, someone went to a facility, I believe, up in upstate New York, maybe it was, where
Rochester.
And they said that you go in that place and it's just an assembly line. It's just an assembly line of these immense mirror blanks, each one of which would be priceless essentially for astronomy. They could just churn those things off like hotcakes, basically. And I mean, why was that upgrade happening? How did that upgrade of Roman from a 1.5 to a 2.4 happen? It's because they just had this hardware just sitting around. They didn't have anything to do with it. It was like, well, we have this.
Here, NASA, we don't need these anymore.
We don't need these anymore. Because we have even cooler
begs the
stuff.
question if they don't need them anymore.
Right. Right. I mean, it doesn't take a lot of, it's pretty easy to do the basic math and figure out if you're at geosynchronous orbit and you want to read a license plate, or you want to count the hairs on an Iranian general's head, you can figure out the aperture you need to do that. And you can also figure out some of the associated technical difficulties that exist with trying to keep that aperture to a figure of merit. And all I can say is that, like, if you look at those kinds of things and you think about the kinds of techniques and capabilities and technologies that would be required to do that, you might see those cropping up in other aerospace places already.
Yeah,
and not just future.
absolutely, as we have with the declassification of adaptive optics in the 1990s.
Boom.
Yeah.
So
More
yeah.
awaits. Yeah.
So there is a nice kind of
technological synergy.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. And I don't know where it goes. I don't know the state of the art now. And if I did, I couldn't tell you, but I really don't know. I wish I did.
For better or worse, space astronomy in particular is intertwined with the military.
Yeah. One thing we didn't talk about at all, and I know I can shut up at any point. You can pull my mic. But one thing I'm very worried about on the ground with the decadal is what's going to happen at Mauna Kea. And
yes,
and people don't talk about that enough. And it's very controversial. It's very people.
Where's my rug? I have to go sweep some things under it. Yeah.
I mean, I've heard people tell me that pretty senior folks whose opinions I value and trust, that if we back away from doing something like the 30-meter telescope, the TMT on Mauna Kea, this project that has been in stasis essentially because of protests from folks who I don't want to speak for them. I don't want to say why they're doing it, but I think it is fair to say that astronomy and astronomers are kind of being scapegoated for what is essentially, you could argue, decades, if not centuries of injustice, right? You could say that. But the point is that if the decadal does not endorse that, if they say, we're gonna back away from the TMT, we're gonna back away from Mauna Kea, you could lose Mauna Kea.
Yeah,
and there's not really, I mean, maybe you'll go to the Tibetan Plateau, except maybe not, because China's going to do something there and we won't.
So for people that don't know, Mauna Kea is a dormant volcano on the big island of Hawaii, and it is literally the best place on the planet, hands down, to do observational astronomy. But it's also sacred ground for Native Hawaiians.
Yeah.
And I've one word. So I don't have a horse in the race, as it were, with regards to the 30-meter telescope. And as an astronomer, I do want to see it get built, but I also understand that we fucked up. And my one word to describe the situation is hubris. Yeah, I think I'll just leave it at that. I don't really want to open that can of worms, but
yeah, and so I don't know. I agree, and I opened it, and I can close it by simply saying that but that we talk about crossroads. That's another example, I think, of what is realistically at stake. It is not inconceivable that directly due to the recommendations of this decadal, that in 20 years there could no longer be telescopes on Mauna Kea, and you lose that unique and singular eye on the sky for the northern hemisphere, and that's it.
Yeah, no, hands down.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to note that the 30-meter telescope and the why am I blanking on the name? There's the extremely large telescope, and then there's what's the third
GMT.
one? GMT, thank you. The giant Magellan telescope.
Yeah.
They were not the top recommendation in 2010 Decadal Survey, and maybe that played a role in it. It was the Vera Rubin Observatory that was the top recommendation. So for the ground-based astronomy, so it is going to be interesting to see what this Decadal Survey says about ground-based astronomy and its future. Especially in light of everything else that's going on with light pollution and social justice and finding and making amends for historical colonialism and active ongoing colonialism.
Right.
So again, that's one of those situations where I don't envy my colleagues that are in that situation and have to navigate and with care and attention to detail and word choices.
There are undergrads or grad students. There are very early career folks in this audience, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, so I'm going to talk to you for a minute, and all I'm going to say is that, and you probably already know this because you're all smarter than me because you're astronomers versus an ink-stained wretch journalist. But pay attention on Thursday. I know you will. But what you're looking at is if you want to bet, you want to play your cards right, pay really close attention to these top recommendations. That's where the field's going to grow, probably. If the decadal isn't somehow, if the community doesn't tear itself apart, right? Which I hope doesn't happen, and I don't think that's likely. But that's where the growth's going to occur, because that's where the money will be. That's where the facilities will be. That's where the new eyes in the skies will be. So if you're trying to plan, like, what's my thesis going to be about? Where am I going to specialize? What waveband? What subject? Look at the decadal, and you will get guidance that is going to be probably better than almost anything else you can get. So I just want to leave it. I want to say that, in terms of utility for folks who are watching, you want to get some utility out of this instead of just, oh, we're talking, whatever. Like,
yeah, so we're going to
that.
flip over to the telescope show now, but I actually, you reminded me of something you mentioned earlier in your talk about the international aspect of this. Again, hubris. The U.S. is not the only nation on this planet. So shockingly, it's interesting how poorly, to be frank, the U.S. and Europe have coordinated their scientific strategies over the past couple of decades, and that's just gonna have to end at some point. Now, I mean, JWST and Hubble were really international efforts. We forget that. I mean, they were U.S. led, but they had significant international participation. But there are many examples of smaller missions in just astrophysics where we've kind of had to one-up each other. There's been a competition. There's been duplication, to be honest. So for example, in our own field of exoplanets, there was Corot, and then there was Kepler, right? And now there's TESS, but then there's going to be Plato. So these are US and European counterparts to their missions. They do build upon each other. And so one of the things I didn't appreciate 10 years ago as a young graduate student, I was a postdoc 10 years ago. Actually, no, I was, geez, oh man, I was a staff scientist 10 years ago, but go back a little bit further. I didn't really understand why the US and Europe would launch very similar missions. There's WMAP and COBE, there's Herschel and Spitzer, there's the list goes on, but they do really build upon each other. And there's this kind of ping-ponging of the science back and forth with each mission. And in that sense, the science has been amazing, but I still wonder sometimes if you spend $1 billion in this mission and $1 billion on this mission in Europe and the US respectively, and scientifically they're interspaced in time and they do build upon one another, but what if, right, you did a joint mission and work together as a global community? And right now we're in a pickle because NASA has been forbidden by Congress to collaborate with China, to have direct, what's the word called, relations, but there's a specific term, one-to-one collaboration with China. And for better or for worse, I'm not here to say whether that's right or wrong, but it does hamper science. And there's a balance that needs to be struck between competition and coordination and collaboration, especially in the era of big science. As you mentioned, Lee, we can't afford all 4 of these flagship mission concepts that have been studied. But we're just one nation now, and ESA and ESO and science and astrophysics in China, collectively, we probably could afford all 4 of these missions concurrently. And so I think one of the interesting things that they did with this decadal survey and these mission concept studies is actually did involve European partners in those studies from day one. But again, China's not been a part of this, and I think that's regrettable, but in my opinion. But yeah, so you talk about screwing up. There are many ways in which we can screw up.
Yes.
All right. So Dr. Parks and Kevin and Ra and Em, I'd like to turn things over to you. And Lee, thank you for joining us tonight. You're welcome to stick around. And Rob, do you have any questions? You've been quiet.
No, I'm just going to join the conversation.
Yeah. Thanks.
I actually I do probably need to go because I'm on the hook for there's a little boy with an iPad. I need to actually go
Yeah, I've been
wrest
there.
it from his
I've
hands.
been there.
But it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I would be welcome. I'd love to come back at any point.
Okay, wait. One question.
Oh yeah, let's do it.
All right, you have to make a bet here.
Oh,
If you're willing,
sure. Okay.
if you had to, maybe if you know something, then maybe you have to not.
I don't know anything. So this is purely. It would be kind of me.
First thing that comes to your mind, top space recommendation.
I think it's going to be Origins. When I say Origin, when I say I think it's going to be, and I say the reason why.
That's interesting.
To me, that it seems to kind of check all the right boxes while staying within these guardrails we talked about. But it's very contingent on a couple of things. One thing it's contingent on is that the cost estimates are remotely valid. How do you know it's valid? Well, the Decadal did something called the trace process. I can't remember what it stands for. It's trace, TRAC.
Yeah, it's a cost estimate.
It's a cost estimate that's done independently by the Aerospace Corporation. And I'm not talking about whether or not trace is accurate, okay? Because that's a whole different debate. But what I'll say is that, if the original projections given by Origins are somewhat plausible and supported by the trace process, I think it has probably the best chances because I think it checks the most boxes for the most number of constituents with the lowest risk.
That is bold. Interesting.
So with that said, I have to say that's not the one I would prefer to actually win. But Origins, I call in the article, I call Origins a space telescope that only astronomers could love. For various reasons, you have to read the article. I won't go into it here, but the point is that it's really cool. It's really great. But it would be the third infrared facility flagship in a row that we've done after Webb and Roman, and maybe some other wave bands.
And to some extent, Spitzer too.
Yeah. So I don't know.
So my prediction is Luvex.
Ooh.
Basically a hybrid, maybe the low end Luvoir, but the reason for that is one, the interdisciplinary nature of the science that Luvoir can obtain, but also the cost of Luvoir for me was pretty rough. I thought that was a little bit. No, I should.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, maybe I'll delete that part of this video.
It's so controversial.
Yeah, it was pretty high from what I heard. And I think exoplanets, I mean, I have to say I'm biased there, and I think that's but specifically about Habex, I think it's kind of really at the edge of, like, it's almost like a threshold, right? Like, it's a very compelling concept. It will find Earth-sized planets. But if you look at the yield estimates, it's very sensitive to what we know about the population of Earth-sized planets around other stars. And, the risk of, finding fewer than we would like is non-zero. And to spend that much money. So I think we're going to go a little bit bigger to mitigate that risk.
I hope you're right.
That's my guess.
I hope you're right. And furthermore, I hope that if you are right, that we don't once again bite off more than we can chew, and we end up with a flagship that takes 20 or 30 years to develop and goes, like an order of magnitude over budget. So we'll see. We'll see come Thursday. We're right on the cusp, everybody. This is so exciting.
Yeah.
It's so exciting.
So what about on the ground?
On the ground? Whew.
Oh, we could refrain from that one.
It is. I just want what I'll say, and then I know I'm so sorry because I feel like we're in the weeds. I just feel like I hope people's eyes aren't glazing over, and we got to look at the sky virtually. But what I want to say is that NASA has done a phenomenal job of preparing for the Decadal and setting the table for the Decadal, and putting these guardrails in and trying to support the process and just being ready for it. I don't think the NSF has done that.
They didn't have the money to be
right, but I mean,
but they didn't.
It's not necessarily their fault, but and it's indicative, perhaps, of symptomatic of other things that are going on. But I just don't think that the NSF is in a good place to support the stuff that that's being talked about, bandied about for major things. I just want to say, next generation, very large array, very cool. Expansion STLIGO, very cool. CMB S4, is that what it's called? Next generation, big, huge, experiment to really, really, really dig into the cosmic micro background. All super exciting. One prediction I'll make: if it is LUVX as the top space flagship, I would wonder, I would question, I think to me that would suggest that it may not be the extremely large telescopes, the TMT and the GMT, as number one, because I feel like you're kind of checking a lot of the same boxes there.
Yeah, but if you went origins for the top space, then you could go TMT, GMT.
Exactly.
Ground.
Exactly. So I'd say if it's LUVX that comes out on top in space, then you might be looking at something like next generation VLA or expansion
or
STLIGO,
LIGO expansion, yeah.
Or even CMBS4 getting a huge influx. I don't know.
Well, we'll find out. And thank you so much for speculating at the end. I don't know. You don't know. We'll find out soon enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much for having me. So I got to go pry the iPad out.
Enjoy, spend your time with your son. I understand. I've got a 7-year-old and twins. They're younger. So take care.
Thank you all so much. Bye.
Thank you
Take care,
for being
Lee.
here.
Okay, Dr. Parks, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, actually, I'm going to hand it over to Kevin or M. I think Kevin is going to be the MC for the telescope portion of the evening. Kevin, my only request is, because we've been talking about exoplanets so much this evening, if you can show them a little bit of the results that we have achieved here at George Mason, that would be nice.
Sure, I can do something like that.
All right, sweet. So
Can you see my screen?
I'll hand it over to Kevin.
All right, thanks. But before we get into that, we'll do a bit of an overview and kind of a virtual tour of the observatory itself before we look at any images or research products or anything like that. So here you can see our webcams all across the various places on the roof of Research Hall. In the top right is our control room, where we would be in if we were doing this in person. We're actually remotely controlling a computer that you can see on the far left-hand side of the screen there. On the top left is the telescope itself, kind of the main part of the operation. Its optical design is referred to as a Ritchie-Chrétien Cassegrain reflecting telescope that essentially just describes the way the mirrors are set up. And this telescope does use mirrors. That's what a reflecting telescope is, instead of lenses like a refracting telescope. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is cost. It's much, much cheaper to make a large mirror than to make a large glass lens with very few imperfections in it. And it's also much, much lighter than a big slab of glass on the inside of the tube there. So the light, well, not right now because we're closed up due to the weather, but basically the light comes in through the front of the telescope and it bounces off the primary mirror on the back that is 32 inches across, or about 0.8 meters. It then gets reflected back up the tube to a foot-wide mirror, the secondary mirror, before being reflected another time through a hole in the center of the primary mirror, where it's reflected into one of our various instruments. It could be the eyepiece if we're actually looking through the telescope directly, or our CCD camera that we use to take images when we're looking at things remotely or doing research, observing, or astrophotography. That CCD camera has a field of view of, I believe, about 26 arc minutes across, which is about half a degree. Here in the bottom left, we can see the outside view of the dome. It's about 20 foot across. For scale, that door is about 6.5 feet. Then on the bottom right, that wheel-looking object is one of the two motors that's used to turn the telescope. So the telescope's mounted in this giant fork. You can see that's holding it up. And it's got one motor here on the top of the fork that turns the telescope kind of up and down in a vertical direction. And then this motor in the bottom right camera twists the fork from side to side. And between those two axes of motion, we can point the telescope almost anywhere in the entire sky. We can control it either manually with a control stick in the dome, or we also have this software here that we use to point the telescope. Anywhere above this kind of green area, this green circle is the horizon, and everything inside this orange circle, it's about 15 degrees above the horizon, is something safe to point at. So this is like a live planetarium style view of what's in the sky right now. And so we can just connect and point and click if we were doing so tonight, if it was clear out, and just send the telescope to that location. And then we can set the dome up to turn with it so that we're always looking out the slit into the sky to make our observations. One of the primary uses of the telescope, besides things like tours like this, is our research observing. The primary research we do is exoplanet research. And we do that by looking at the brightnesses of stars. Let's see. So we're specifically looking for transiting exoplanets, which are planets that pass between us and their host star. And as they do that, they'll cast a very small shadow. And we can measure that by looking at the brightness of a host star over time. As the planet passes in front of the star, you'll see its brightness will dip down. And then when it leaves the path between us and the star, the brightness will go back up again and stay constant otherwise. And we can measure that difference in depth. And if such a dip appears periodically, that's a sign that what we're looking at could be a planet. And things like the depth change, the depth of the dip that we're looking at tell us things like the radius of the planet. So this is the primary research use for the campus telescope. We are part of a global effort with the NASA TESS mission to look for and confirm such planet candidates with other observatories around the globe. I think from here, I'm going to turn it over to Em, who's going to show you some images, I guess, some astrophotography that we've taken with the telescope of a few other targets. And I will let him do that as we're somewhat low on time. So you can just go ahead and get started.
Okay. Hello. So can you first enable sharing screen or just make me a co-host? Real quick.
I'll just keep sharing my screen and you can just do what you want on the observatory computer.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So can you see my cursor moving?
Yes.
All right. Okay, so the first object we usually look at if we were on the observatory rooftop is a planet we can see by our naked eye. It's Jupiter, and this is taken by some of our tour guides. This is taken in visible light, I believe. It's three colors of filter combined. In this image, we don't see the red spot right now because Jupiter is spinning around itself about 10 hours per revolution. So sometimes we see red spots, sometimes we don't. If we look at the eyepiece, or even take it with our CCD, we can see some of its moon. Usually we see 4 moons: Io, Europa, Ganymede, and okay. not sure we have an image with a red spot, but that's fine. Okay, so Jupiter is also one of the gas giant in our solar system. It's so massive that it can shift the center of gravity where every object in our solar system orbits around out of the sun. And this Jupiter is a model, I guess, for exoplanets. You may come across some terms like Earth-like exoplanet for some exoplanet that looks like Earth. We also have something called hot Jupiter for exoplanet that spin a little bit faster than Jupiter, and the temperature is hotter than Jupiter. It's a crucial planet for any solar system because it's similar to, it has components similar to a sun or a star, mainly hydrogen or helium. It can potentially grow to a star, but it's a failed star. It didn't acquire enough mass, so it cannot produce fusion nuclear at the core. Another object we usually see during the in-person tour is Saturn. So I guess it's here. This is Saturn taken with RGB filter. So again, it's 3 filters combined with some color assigned to it. So we see a blurry spot with some ring. Not sure if we have more focused image in this folder, but anyway, so it's the farthest planet we can see with our naked eye. And if we look at the telescope, it somewhat looks like this too. It's far, and because we cannot focus on it very well. Jupiter and Saturn are all gas giant, but Saturn is more special than Jupiter in the way that it has very low density, that if we can have a hypothetical tub that big enough to fit to fill up water and fill up the Saturn, it would be float on the water in the tub. And I'd like to show you the location on this map of the sky. So they're both in the constellation called Capricornus during this time. In a few months, they all shift to what we call Aquarius. And these are, those constellations are in what we call zodiac, or the plane where sun travels past through. So they are all the same plane as the sun. And this is because every planets and asteroids and every object in solar system tend to orbit around the same plane. And I think Kevin mentioned about the fog in our telescope and the way we have also motor at the telescope. Let me show that real quick. So we have fog and motor mount on this cylinder. So this telescope basically moved in two axes. One is parallel to this line, the fork twist, so that the telescope can point parallel to this line, and the tilt in this axis makes the telescope move along this line. So those lines are called rise ascension for this vertical line and declination for this horizontal line. They basically tell out the location of our objects, and we can see it. Every object moves parallel to this line from east to west. So if this is about 9 p.m. and if we wait about 2 or 3 hours, those objects will set along this line. That's how we that's how we control the telescope and make it point at the fixed location on the sky. Okay, so any questions? Or Kelvin, do you have something to add on?
No, we're pretty close to time, I think. I don't know if you want to show maybe one more image. I guess I can talk
okay.
about one more since we have a couple more minutes.
Good.
Let's maybe take a look at a galaxy, or a pair of galaxies, that is. Here's another image we've taken with the Campus Telescope. This is the Whirlpool Galaxy, also known as M51. And it's actually two galaxies here. You can see there's this smaller dwarf galaxy above it that's actually being swallowed up by the primary galaxy. And obviously the Whirlpool Galaxy gets its name because we have this nice, I guess, top-down view of a spiral galaxy, the same structure that our Milky Way has. If we were able to see it from the outside, it might look something like this.
It's one of the safest objects, right? The object that we use to be used as a standard measurement in our universe.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, I see question chat. What's the name of what's being shown right now? It's the Whirlpool Galaxy, or M51. I see that that's a direct message, but yeah. Yeah, this is a spiral galaxy. If we have any more questions in the chat, we've got a couple more minutes about one of these objects we've showed, or anything else about the observatory in general. I saw some of the previous ones were getting answered. But if not, I suppose we will call it there for the night. Thank you all for coming. I don't know if
yeah, thank you, everyone.
You have anything else to add?
No, this is great. I hope you've all enjoyed tonight's discussion with Lee Billings on this brief telescope show. We encourage you to come back and join us on a future public night. We have one more in 2 weeks. And our speaker that night is going to be Ryan Fifle, who's one of our graduate students. So he's going to talk about, well, I guess we'll find out what he's going to talk about in a couple of weeks. And stay tuned on our website. Follow us on Twitter at GMU Observatory. And you can always Google us or go to science.gmu.edu/observatory to find more information. I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. And hopefully, once this pandemic subsides, we'd love to have you visit in person. We also do offer small private tours as well. So reach out to us, gmuobservatory@gmail.com, and get in touch. Thank you for coming, everyone, tonight.
Good night.
Close up shop.